Okay, recording started. Everything ready. If you want to ask a question, like ping Rob or ping me, and we can read through them afterwards. Okay, hello. My name's Surya, or Gears as I go by online because of a decision 13-year-old version of myself made. So that's fun. This talk is about contributing to the Gleam compiler because I haven't actually done anything particularly interesting using Gleam, and I spend, I think, probably more time developing Gleam. So yeah, this is sort of a general guide on how to contribute to the Gleam compiler if you want to do that. Um, yeah, but obviously the Gleam compiler is written in Rust. Not everyone here is going to know Rust. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Gleam compiler. I guess more this is just contributing to open source projects, but from the perspective of the Gleam compiler. Or even doesn't necessarily have to be open source projects. It can just be like getting familiar with a new code base and like trying to figure out how to get started with a new code base, whether that be like in a personal project or an open source project like Gleam compiler, or even like maybe you're starting a new job and you need to get familiar with the code base surrounding the bit you're developing, and you've got to sort of work your way up to having good understanding. I should probably make the title shorter a bit next time. So let's start with my first piece of advice, and this is one that you hear quite a lot when people talk about contributing to open source projects, and that is to start with issues, right? Before you make a pull request, changing the thing you want to do, just start opening issues. And yeah, you hear people say that a lot, and that is for good reason, right? First thing is you can tell us about bugs we don't realize exist, because even if you don't end up fixing those bugs, we now know that those bugs exist, and someone will probably eventually get around to fixing it. It's also a good way to share new ideas that you've had, because yeah, not everyone is going to agree on the design choices that are made with the language, and so if you just open a pull request straight away asking to like make this big change, it's going to be difficult to like yeah, work, like you've already put in the work to make this thing happen, but if we don't agree with that, then there can be some issues. But if you start with issues, then there are no issues, because you can share your idea, we can talk about it, we can find any pain points, any issues, and discuss it, and yeah. And then obviously issues can lead to PRs. If you make an issue, you're like, okay, here's this thing I want changed, or here's this bug I found that needs to be fixed. And then later you can go and say, oh, okay, I might try and, you know, fix this issue, or whatever it is. Okay, the next one is also fairly obvious, I guess. Start simple, like don't try to tackle mutual recursion on JavaScript target as your first contribution to the Gleam compiler, because it probably just isn't going to work, right? There are lots of issues which have been labeled with good first issue, and these are usually changes to one specific part of the code base, or very small changes, which, yeah, basically only require you to look at a small piece of the puzzle that makes the Gleam like build tool and everything work, and just find one little bit, figure out how that works, and then solve the issue surrounding that. Um, and yeah, you can always ask for help. If you are trying to contribute for the first time, or just generally if you want to help the Gleam compiler, but you get stuck on a certain bit, just ask someone. Like, ask in this Discord. You can DM me. I'm happy to help with problems related to the Gleam compiler. because it's it's my favorite thing to do at the moment. There is some documentation regarding how the tooling works, so this is just like a snippet of one of the documentation pieces of documentation that exists in the compiler, which explains like how the testing works, how snapshot testing works, and what that is. But I there's not really any documentation of the code base itself and like what the different parts do. So I'm currently in the process of writing a project structure document. This is like the beginning of it, which basically is going to go into some level of detail on how each sort of individual part of the compiler works, like the parser, the type checker, the code gen, and all of the like subsystems of that. And it will just give you a sort of explanation of what each bit does, and then some of them are gonna like link to outside resources, like you can read up on how recursive descent parsing works on Wikipedia or whatever. So yeah, hopefully that will be done at some point. So yeah. Next tip is make the features you want. Because, well, again, there's a few reasons for this. Number one is motivation. If you have a reason that you want a specific feature in Gleam, or maybe there's a bug which you have found which is affecting a piece of code you're trying to write and you really need it fixed so you can get on writing the thing you want to do, that is going to give you motivation to push through with the issue and try and figure out a solution in the end. Also, you'll be a good judge of the feature. For example, when I was implementing the code action, which lets you import a module if you've already basically typed out the function and the module isn't imported, you can just hover over it and trigger code action to import the module. I've just been using Go quite a lot of the time, and that has that code action, and I really wanted that in Gleam. And so I also was able to come up with a design of how the code action would work and understand, because I was, kind of wanting that feature specifically, I would know exactly how I wanted it to work, and that helped me effectively shape the code and design the code action to be what it ended up being. And the last thing is just when you finish it, you get this really nice satisfaction of completing this task that you wanted. Like, after that, I now get to use the code action to import a module, and I know that I, successfully found the thing that I wanted to do. I implemented it in code, it got merged, and now it's a feature in Gleam, and I can use it whenever I'm writing Gleam code. So that's always fun. Next tip is that you don't need to know the whole code base, right? Most changes are going to have you tackling one part of the code base, or at least one part most of the time, and then there are often some other little like effects that trickle into other modules, but mostly it's centered around one general area of the code base. Yeah. So let's just do a quick case study. When I was implementing the rename thing, whatever they're called, root. Anyway, the rename feature for the language server. What bits of the code did I need to tackle, right? I needed to know the language server. So that was obviously the main part. It's a it's a feature of the language server, so I had to be familiar with that. I'd already made quite a few code actions, so I was roughly knew how that bit worked, but I did have to go and study how the exact routing of the like the client requests into the server that determines like what part of the language server gets used. I need to figure out how that works, and we'll probably talk about that in a second. I also need to know the AST visitor, which is a part of the code which lets you effectively look at the program and essentially traverse the tree of syntax, and lets you find all of the leaves and basically used it to find all of the different parts of the uh yeah I need basically to find all of the references to a variable when you're trying to rename it. And then the unit tests, I need to know how the unit testing system worked so that I could create new tests for the rename action. But I didn't need to know anything about the parser, the lexer, the type checker, the code gen. Like, I don't really need to know about Hindley-Milner type systems or how the pretty printer works in the code gen and all of that stuff. All I need to know is how the language server works, and how the AST visitor works. So yeah, that is something to keep in mind. You don't need to study the whole code base, just learn the bits which you need. And what I've found is that as I've continuously contributed to the Gleam compiler, each issue I do, or each feature I add, slightly increases my knowledge of the code base. Because I learn about something new, right? I learned about, in this rename thing, I learned about how the routing works from the client request into the server itself. And yeah, like at first I knew nothing, but now I know about the language server and about the parser because I've done stuff. Yeah, let's just look at another one really quickly. When I was adding the custom panic message for let assert, this one's a bit more complex because you obviously need the parser so you can implement the new syntax. You need the AST so you can add that information to the abstract syntax tree when we're, handling the program. You need the type checker so you can ensure that the custom panic message is a string and not some other type. The formatter so it can properly format, the new syntax. And then also the code gen, for generating the code. Oh, and the language server for integrating that with code actions. But I still didn't need to know anything about the compiler CLI, which is the part which handles all of the interfacing in the command line. This is all within compiler core, which is like the working parts of Gleam. Next one is pretty simple. Just keep trying. Like, if there is a feature that you are that you want to work on, and if you have significant motivation to do it, just keep going at it, right? Like, don't give up at the first sign of the first sign of trouble. And I think this applies to software engineering in general. I actually came up with this today, just a few minutes before the talk, because I was working on an issue which I have attempted before, and then somebody else attempted it, and we still don't have a proper fix for it. And I was just, I felt like going back to it, and I just kept racking my brains until I found a potential solution to it. And as I started implementing it, it started seeming more and more likely that this would work. So even though I'd previously failed, with a previous approach, just keep coming up with different ways that you could do it, and just try and think of as many different routes to the solution of the problem you're trying to solve, and probably even if all of them but one fail, one will probably get you there to the other side. Okay, here's one which I don't know about other people, but I use this one a lot. And that is learn by copy pasting, or that's what I like to call it. So, yeah, let's look at an example of go back to when I was implementing the rename feature. So I had to figure out how the language server gets from the client sending a request saying, hey, language server, I want to rename this thing, and how that routes through the code and gets to the function which actually processes it. So my my experience in the language server is mostly doing code actions, so I basically started there. And I found the function which goes through and tries to generate as many code actions as it can from the parameters. And then here's what the function head looks like. The syntax is pretty similar to Gleam, so hopefully you can follow along, sort of. So what I did is I found this, I knew where that was, I'm familiar with this function, and I say, okay, where is this called? So I hit the go to references button in my editor, and I found where it's called. It's called from this function, which you can see down at the bottom there. It calls the engine.codeActions method. Okay, so where's this called? This is called from here, which is some sort of match on this request type. And it's basically just pattern matching. If we have a format request, we call the format function. If we have a hover request, we call the hover function. And so I thought, okay, I'm probably going to need to add a rename request type. Because, yeah, that's what I'm adding. But I went further back still, and I found where this is getting called from. And this is getting called from this place. So this is a big pattern matching list, and it's basically matching along these different kinds of requests. And I know I know a bit about the language server protocol, and I know that these are something that the client will send. So I can sort of figure out that the client will send us this string, and the first time we need to differentiate what this string means is at this point. So I went to the bottom of the pattern matching branch, and I just literally I took the last branch that wasn't like the catch-all, and I just copy pasted it. Literally, it's exactly the same. And then I did effectively a find and replace. I replaced all the things that said document symbol with rename, because that is what that is. And then I basically went up the function chain again. I went here and I added a rename request. I went here, I basically copied this function and created one called rename, and then copied this function and created one called rename, and then from there I actually implemented the features that I needed, because obviously copy pasting is only going to get you so far. At some point you're going to need to create an original piece of code. But when it comes to creating the structure of the code you want to write, I find that copy pasting existing code of a similar structure really helps me to sort of just not have to reinvent the wheel, and just take the code, change it a bit, and basically make it fit the exact thing that I want. And yeah, the last thing is just to have fun. That is the most important, arguably most important one. I started contributing to Gleam because I enjoyed it, and I've continued contributing to Gleam because I continue to enjoy it. And if you're not having fun, then maybe just take a step back, and figure out, okay, do I still want to continue with this? And if not, maybe don't. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for coming to my talk. Hopefully it was interesting. I don't know, it's just sort of I guess it's just me writing all my thoughts about how my process of developing Gleam is onto slides, and saying it in front of everyone. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Um, like we said before, anybody, any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I did have one personally. Now that you've been working on the compiler for a little while, um, what aspects do you personally find you enjoy the most to work on as part of the project as a whole? Um, and side note, side question is, what parts do you find you don't like working on, and what do you think can be done to make it so that you would want to work on them more or for others to want to work on those?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, I think I do want to say that the Gleam codebase is a very nice codebase. Like it's been put together very well. Um, yeah, Louis did a very good job of like keeping it structured, making sure none of the parts kind of got out of hand. It's all well documented. All the variable names are good because Louis has like a strict um what's the word like he ensures that all of the variable names are like descriptive and not just like single letter abbreviations because I have tried to get into other code bases before and it just I can't deal with that. So what part do I like working on the most? I mean, honestly, I think I probably have the most fun making code actions, just like seeing when I write something and uh, I can just like see it transforming code in front of my eyes in like seemingly magical ways. That's just a lot of fun to do. Parts I don't like working on. Um, um, I mean, probably my one of my least favorite parts is doing the caching and like serialization and deserialization because we use this thing called cap and proto, which has this like annoying thing where it's got like a separate language. You got to write the schema in, and then you got to like run a code gen thing that generates Rust code that, and it just like it's a bit clunky. And we've been wanting to switch it out for Serde, which is this Rust serializing and deserializing library, which like automatically generates the schema for you. Um, but we haven't got around to it because there's like a couple of issues with that. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I enjoy working on most parts. Um, it's always fun, like delving into a new part of the code base that I've never touched before and being like, "Oh, how does it work in here?" Um, but yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so
Did
Julian, I have see a few questions here.
uh, cool.
Julian asks, I might have missed it, but where is the architecture doc located at? Uh, I'm not sure because I showed two docs, right? One of them is located in the Gleam repository in I think docs slash compiler slash readme dot markdown, and that just contains like, and there's also contributing dot markdown, which is in like the root of the repository. So you can check those both out. The one which explains the structure of the project itself is work in progress. I have that locally on my machine, and I'm in the process of writing it, and hopefully I'll get round to that at some point once my current things are on. Um, yeah, so let's see. Any other questions? I think I saw at least one more.
There was an earlier one about the document you mentioned on that you were writing. Does it currently exist anywhere
No,
that
that
anyone
that's the
can
question I
find,
just
or
answered,
is
I think.
okay? Whoops.
Uh, yeah.
Mm,
So yeah, the one I'm currently working on is literally locally on my machine. So well, actually no, you can find it on my fork of the repository. It's under a the branch called contributing docs, I think, but it's like the the part that I showed in um the part that I showed in the screenshot in the slides. Like if I go back to it, where is it? Here it is. That's all that I've written so far. If you scroll below that, you just have a list of all of the modules which I I basically did like a find command, just found all the Rust files, and I basically just have a list of all of them, and I'm going to go through them one by one and document them. So it's very unfinished. That's all there is at the moment. Metro asks, how do you find Gleam from your Minecraft background? Okay, so I guess this is something that people think just based on reading my profile. I didn't start programming with Minecraft. Um, so my dad's a web developer, so he taught me JavaScript when I was a yeah when I was quite young. And I did JavaScript and HTML and CSS for a while, and then I found Minecraft data packs sometime after that. Um, and sort of at some point, I also got into language design. That started with just like learning about how parser combinators work, and then I tried to make a toy language and an interpreter, and then I slowly sort of built up my knowledge of that, and I was making my own like toy language with like an LLVM back end. And then at some point I was like, okay, so I've basically just sort of come up with my idea of how a language compiler works, and sort of tried to figure out how I would design it. But I really wanted to know what a real world compiler actually looked like. So I started by um, trying to contribute to the Rust compiler. And I just found that it's such a massive code base with so many things going on with it that I just kind of found it a bit overwhelming. And then I heard about Gleam when that released 1.0, and then sometime later I was like, wait a second, what language is the Gleam compiler written in? And it was written in Rust, and I was like, okay, I know Rust. So let's just like look into it. And I just sort of, started with an issue, and then I continued, and then, yeah, here we are today.
I wish I could say, "Oh wow, I know Rust," and then just jump into something. We did have another question from Ben. Uh, Swapping between Rust and Go, what drives you the craziest? Is there anything that drives you crazy about swapping between them?
Um, Swapping between Rust and Go. Oh, so what you mean, like the differences between the languages? I mean, I haven't actually touched Go in quite a while now. Um, I think, yeah. I mean, when I started with Rust, because I learned Go first, and I learned Rust afterwards. Um, and one thing that I found difficult with Rust at the beginning is that like Go is a garbage collected language, but it's sort of seen as low level because it compiles to machine code, which I think is somewhat of an illusion, I guess. And so I like, yeah, the different like rules, like the borrow checker, and like the different systems of allocations that like caught me off guard at first. So that's something I find difficult. When I go back to Go from Rust, um, I find that the lack of like enums, because Rust has enums, like Gleam has types with multiple variants. Um, but Go doesn't have that. The closest thing you get is like interfaces, which is like a kind of weird um, version of enums where you basically just have like something which kind of defines what it is based on a set of functions, which after Rust and like pattern matching and algebraic data types, I find that really hard to use whenever I go back. Um, yeah. Um,
Yeah, it is. Okay. Do.
I think that's all the questions that have been sent so far.
I believe so.
Okay.
Uh, Yoshi has one. Gears, have you ever written Gleam? Be honest.
Yes, I have. I there was a time when when the only Gleam I had written was basically test cases for the features I had implemented. Um, but at some point I was like, there was a point when I was like, uh, I was having a bit of writer's block with the compiler, and I thought I'm going to take a break. I'm going to write some real Gleam code, and maybe that will, give me inspiration. Because, like I said, if there is uh, like if there is a feature I that I really want, like I'm writing Gleam, and I find something that I think would make my development experience better, then I can be like, oh, I can go and implement that in the compiler now. So I kind of flip flop between the two. Currently, I'm in a compiler development phase, but yeah, who knows what will happen. How many parser combinator libraries have I published? Zero, I think. I've written a couple in JavaScript. I was following a before I knew about like uh yeah anything about programming languages and parsing whatever. I was following a course about writing parser combinators, and I effectively used like the course helped you develop a parser combinator library, and then used it later to create a little programming language. So yeah, I'm not going to explain what a parser combinator is here. Uh, you can look it up. I'm sure there's plenty of resources online.
Someone drop a Wikipedia link in the chat, please. Yeah, it does seem to have become a bit of a rite of passage of everybody just dropping parser combinator libraries. I also have yet to write one, although that's partly because I still don't understand parser combinators, and I'm okay with that.
They're pretty cool. They don't work on a large scale, which is something I found out. Like you couldn't, I it wouldn't be a good idea to use parser combinators to parse Gleam. I don't think. You could, but it would result in bad error messages. Is my experience. Um, so yeah. Okay. I think that's it then. Unless anyone has any last minute questions.
Seems like we're good.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was super cool. If anybody has any questions about contributing to Gleam, please, Gears is here to help.
Yeah, like if you ever have any questions after the fact, just like ping me on Discord or something. Um, but yeah, thanks for coming, everyone.